Well, as I was saying, I'd made this little radio set, and we used to, of course, we'd only one pair of headphones, so Edie and I used to take it in turns. I'd find a station, and then when it got it coming through all right, and I'd listen to a bit, then I would hand over the headphones to Edie. But my word, it was thrilling, really, because even though I'd been a wireless mechanic in the Royal Flying Corps, we'd never been able to hear voices over the headphones. We'd only been able to hear the Morse code, so that was something entirely new to sit and listen to dance bands or somebody singing or something like that. Of course, they wouldn't be thought much of today, but it was a marvellous thing in those days. Well, apart from not being able to rent a house, we were very happy in other ways while we were at Cross Street. Work was regular, and everything seemed like everything seemed that we'd be able to keep on gradually building up until the time when we were able to rent a house, and that would have been it. But evidently things had been going too well too long, and it hadn't to be, because at the factory, in our particular department, at any rate, there was one job which there was 6 men used to work on this particular job, and that was putting the counters together, assembling them. If you want to know what a counter is, well, if you've got an electricity meter in your house and you look through that bit of a glass partition, you'll see something with little pointers on and pointing to numbers, and they're actually counting the amount of electricity, the number of electric units that you're using. It was a skilled job putting these together, and the men who worked on this job had originally been watchmakers. They'd been used to putting watches and clocks together, so they were used to that sort of work. Well, it was a kind of work too that needed nimble fingers, and of course women have got more nimble fingers than men, and the firm got the idea that they'd like to introduce women onto this particular class of work. Although we had women working on different kinds of work, they'd never been able to do anything like this before, usually more simpler jobs. And they put the proposition to the union that they wanted to introduce these women. Well, of course, it would have meant that those 6 men would have lost their jobs, and the union was against it. And a shop meeting was held, and of course, me being the shop steward, I had to call the meeting. The meeting was held, and they decided to oppose this. So I was the man who had to go and tell the superintendent that we were against this particular thing, and that we would oppose it as far as we were able to. And so anyway, because of the opposition, and they didn't want, it might have been that they didn't want any trouble just at that particular time, they gave in to our opposition and put the thing off. Well, although they'd put the thing off, they'd still got the idea in mind they weren't going to give up so easily. And because I was a shop steward, and of course I'd had to act as representative for the men, I suppose I was looked upon as a scapegoat for not allowing them to do what they wanted. And there was another fella as well as me. He was a member of the district committee, and he was also very strongly against it as well. And so that ended, and we went on working normal. But evidently the firm were building up something to try and get control so that they could bring these women in. So what they did was we went on working for about another couple of months. And then one afternoon, the foreman sent for me and this other fella, Reuben Rogers, his name was, the man who was on the district committee. And they said, the foreman said they were getting short of orders again and they'd have to drop one or two of the men, and that we'd been chosen as the two to lose our jobs. Well, of course, it was right out of the blue, that was, because as a workman, I mean, there was nothing as regards my workmanship or the way I did my work. I was always a conscientious workman, and naturally it knocked me for six, as you might say. But there's nothing we could do about it, because although the men had opposed the idea, they weren't prepared to go to stop work in order to prevent us from getting the sack. So that was the end of my work at the British Insulated Cable Company. I hope you'll excuse this narrative being a bit disjointed. Evidently our sacking had frightened the other men in the shop a bit, because about a month after we'd got the sack, they brought these women in to be trained to do the job, and there was no opposition from the men. Well, this was a real knock for me, I can tell you. I'd now got 2 children to keep, and all that we got was unemployment pay. And unfortunately, the only place where workmen of my calibre, well, not exactly my calibre, but of my trade, I should really say, was instrument making. And the only place I was likely to be able to get a job at that was in Liverpool. And there was a lot of unemployment in Liverpool at the time. But nevertheless, I spent days and days traipsing round Liverpool trying to get a job, but there was nothing doing. And so it looked pretty bleak. I will say this, that Mum was very good during this period. She never grumbled about it, and I mean, it made it hard for her. Well, I'd been out of work for about 3 months when, looking through the vacancies column in the Liverpool Echo, I saw an advert which interested me. It was from the BLM Ericsson company, who were makers of telephones and telephone equipment. and they were advertising for electrical instrument makers. And so I thought this was my only chance to get back in the trade. And so I immediately sat down and wrote an application to the Ericssons in Beeston. And after a few days I got a reply back offering me a job, and I had asked for 65 shillings a week, which was 5 shillings, of course, above the normal wage that we'd been getting at the BIC. But I thought that the skill required in my particular trade was worth a bit more than the £3 a week, which was the union rate. But and in addition, in reply to that, I got an offer that they'd pay me £3 a week for 6 months, and if at the end of 6 months I'd proved satisfactory, then they'd give me the other 5 shillings. So I wanted to get back in the trade very badly. I certainly didn't like being out of work, so I accepted. Well, I happened, of course, to tell. The word got around that I was leaving Prescott and going to Beeston to work, and about a few days before I was due to go to Nottingham, the fellow who'd taken over the shop steward's job in my place came to see me at night, and he said, "I hear you're going to Nottingham, Jack." So I said, "Yes, that's right." "Well," he said, "if I was you, I wouldn't go." I said, "Why not?" "Well," he said, "the firm only sacked you to quieten you down. You were getting a bit too lively for them." So I said, "And now that they've heard that you're likely to leave the district, they sent me to tell you that you can have your job back." Well, I was a person who believed in keeping my word. And I said to him, "Look here, Harry," his name was Harry Dutton. I said, "Look here, Harry," I said, only a day or two ago, I said, "I've written and told that firm that I'm going to take up a job with them. And I said, I've given them my word and I'm going. I'm not going to break my word." And, of course, the result of that was, of course, that I eventually found myself in Beeston, but more of that later. Now, the fact that I'd been a wireless mechanic in the Royal Flying Corps, and, of course, when I applied for this job, I'd put that down in my application, and that had had a lot to do with me getting the job. Because what was happening at Ericssons at that particular time was this, that up to then, the telephone system was, it wasn't automatic. If you wanted to get to ring anybody on the telephone, you had first of all to ring the exchange and give them the number you wanted, and then they put you through to that particular number. Well, the telephone company that first brought this, the new automatic telephone out, was an American company, the Automatic Telephone Company, and they had a factory in Liverpool. And, of course, they were supplying any particular body that wanted the automatic telephone. They were supplying them. And the English firms that only made the equipment for the old-fashioned, through the exchange telephone system, they were losing orders to this other firm. So there was Ericssons and one or two other English firms. They'd all realised that they'd got to adopt the automatic system. Now, Ericssons, of course, the main firm was in Sweden, and the firm at Beeston was only a branch of the BLM Ericsson company, as it was known, and they'd sent. They also had a factory. Ericssons also had a factory in Austria, in Vienna, and they'd sent a man from this factory in Vienna to go to America and get a job in one of these automatic telephone companies and learn all about the system. Of course, he was an educated man. He wasn't just an ordinary workman. He was more of a theoretician. Well, but he was practical at the same time. His name was Engblom, and eventually became the manager of the Beeston factory. But at the time, he was a fellow named, there was a captain, or a Colonel Taylor, I think, was the manager when I first went there. But this Engblom, he had charge of all the experimental work on this automatic system. Now, they evidently hadn't been able to get the skilled men that they required from around Nottingham, and they'd put adverts in a lot of the big town newspapers trying to get men to come to Beeston. And I remember there was one from Newcastle, there was one from Liverpool, there was one from Southampton, in different parts of the country. There was about a dozen of us all together. And only 3 out of the team that worked on this experimental work in the model room at Beeston were actually resident in Beeston. Well, there was only one was resident in Beeston and the other 2 in Nottingham. And the one who was resident in Beeston, he'd got his experience he worked for a firm of range finders in Scotland during the war, so that he was really a very experienced man, and he became charge hand. But what happened was this. But first of all, I'd better tell you how I got to Beeston in the first place. Well, I didn't know much about the railway system of the countries because I hadn't travelled much. Apart from travelling about in France, I hadn't travelled about much in England before the war. And I didn't know just how to get to Nottingham or Beeston, whichever you like to take. So I went and inquired, and they told me I would have to go to Liverpool and get a train from Liverpool to Manchester and then change there. No, I didn't have to change there. It went straight. It picked up in one of the big stations in Manchester, and then it went on through Sheffield to Nottingham. And we came in at Victoria Station. Victoria, of course, it doesn't exist now. It's where the Victoria Centre is. Or it was then. That's where the Victoria Station was. So, and then I got to cross Nottingham to get to the London and North Western, as it was then. The London and North Western trains ran from Nottingham to Derby and that way on, and of course through Beeston. So to get to Beeston, I had to cross over Nottingham and get on the train to Beeston. I went and reported at the factory, and fortunately they'd saved me the trouble of looking round for lodgings. They'd already got lodgings for me at a Mrs. Wilson's in Trafalgar Road, which was, of course, very near to the factory and was very, very handy. And now I can perhaps start telling you a bit about, I haven't told you how I got to Beeston. I can perhaps go back and tell you a bit about the kind of work we had to do. What happened was this, that in the drawing office, the draftsmen were already drawing doing all the drawings for this new automatic system. This Engblom was at the head of it all, and then when certain parts were drawn, they used to bring the drawings into the model room, and then they'd take them to this charge on, Bob Wright, his name was, and every single item was on a separate little drawing. And then he'd give one of these drawings out to the different men under him. As I said, there was about 12 of us. And you made that particular part. And then when you'd done that, he'd give you another drawing, and you'd make another part until you'd got all the parts had been made. And then when all the parts had been made, then they'd be put together and tried out. And it was very interesting work, I can tell you. For a bit, I found it very hard work. I don't mean hard physically, I mean from the point of view of skill, because it was very highly skilled work. In fact, higher than I'd ever been used to. But anyway, I must have done all right eventually, because after I'd been there about 10 weeks, the foreman came to me one afternoon and he said, Finney, I'm not going to make you wait 6 months for that extra 5 shillings that we promised you. He said, I'm quite satisfied with your work, you're quite satisfactory, and I'm going to put the rise through now. But before we reached that point, that was about 10 weeks, as I say, after I started work at Ericssons, it was very difficult in other senses, in that out of my wages, I was sending you out of, and that was out of a wage of £3, I was sending your mother 30 shillings a week. I should say, I should have said mum then, not your mother, because I do get a bit mixed up as I'm talking. But I used to send mum 30 shillings a week. I'd got 25 shillings to pay for me lodgings, and by what with the national health insurance stoppages and things like that, I was left with 2 and 9pence a week, and out of that, of course, I had to, if I write to your mum and any little bits of odds and ends, well, it was getting rather difficult. And after about 6 weeks, I'd come to the conclusion that I'd have to give the job up and go back, because financially we weren't much better than when I was out of work. But I wrote home and and told Mum what the position was, and I said I'd either have to go back home to Prescott, or else I'd got to look for rooms in Beeston. And we eventually agreed that I shouldn't give my job up, but I should look for rooms in Beeston. So I saw an advert in the Nottingham Evening Post. I'd been looking, you see, over the past few days, and I saw an advert for rooms in what was called then Silver Hill. That's near Broadgate. It's nearer to the university end, and it was. So I went and interviewed the woman, and decided to take 2 rooms. No, there was 3 rooms, because it transpired that she wanted to have all the downstairs, and what she was actually letting was the upstairs rooms. Her husband was a steeplejack, and he wasn't at home quite very much. He'd perhaps only come home at weekends, so they didn't need as much bedding space. And they were using the parlour as a bedroom. By the way, they also, Mrs. Kennedy, her name was, and she also had 2 children. Anyway, I agreed to take these 3 upstairs rooms, and there was a little grate in the front bedroom, and we had to do some of our cooking on that. We had to boil kettles and all that sort of thing on this little grate in the bedrooms. But we'll have to go back a bit now. We have to keep doing that, you see. You get a bit ahead of myself. Your mum had arranged with a local furniture remover, who was also had a green groceries in Prescott. She arranged for him to bring to move our furniture to these rooms, and arranged it for him to do it on a Sunday, because on that day I could get 3 men from the lodgings. They were also lodging in the same Mrs. Wilson's house, and the 3 of these men had offered to come and help me. So when the furniture came on the Sunday afternoon, they were able to help me, and we got all the furniture in and got things right before bedtime. Then I had to dash off to Victoria Station in Nottingham to meet Mum, who was coming with Joan and Eileen by train. And I'll never forget when the train came in, and your mum was carrying the suitcase, and Eileen was still only a little girl, and I remember I took her in my arms to carry her up the steps over the bridge, and she put her arms round my neck and really hugged me as though she was ever so pleased to see me. And considering that she was so young, you know, well, I always remember that. We weren't very happy living in bedrooms, because it made it rather awkward, because Eileen and Joan had nowhere to play, only inside the bedrooms. And there was a kind of a passage upstairs leading into the 2 back bedrooms, and they used to play and run along there. and Mrs. Kennedy used to grumble at the noise they made. Well, they weren't making a lot of noise, but because of this grumbling and the fact of always being upstairs and it being nowhere for the children to play, I can't say that we were very happy while we were there. And then there was another thing that because I'd been out of work such a long time before getting this job, I was really hard up again. And when it came to paying the furniture remover for bringing a furniture all the way from Prescott to Beeston, I had to borrow the money from the firm, from Ericssons, and I had it so much stopped out of my wages every week until it was all paid for. And it wasn't until a week or two before Christmas that I'd got it paid off. Then things were beginning to get a bit better then. But one thing I do remember about the first winter in Beeston was that it was the fog, because in those days we used to get far worse fogs because of all the houses burned coal, and there was, with all the smoke going up into the air, you used to get very bad fogs. And being near the river as well, it used to drift up from the river. And I can always remember coming out of work at night, and on a Friday night, to save you, because your mum was usually short of money and had used it all up, I used to go along the high road and get some groceries as I came home. And I remember this night I came out after drawing my wages at Ericssons and walked along up Station Road to the high road, and along the high road to home, and I could hardly see. I could hardly see my way, because I hadn't been used to it. I'd been in fogs before, but nothing like that. And eventually I got to Silver Hill, and I remember I went up to the wrong house and knocked on the door. And it wasn't until then I realised I was I'd gone down the wrong street. But I eventually found my way. But that was my first experience of a Beeston fog. We don't get them these days. Being upstairs in Mrs. Kennedy's and having to eat our meals upstairs and cook some of our meals. Of course, some things, Mum used to go down into Mrs. Kennedy's kitchen and anything like for baking or anything like that. But it must have attracted mice, because we had quite a lot of mice. And I remember I had to put traps down before we went to bed at night, with a bit of cheese in. I put two, one at either side of the fireplace, and there was very often one in the morning when I came down. In fact, there was one occasion when in one trap there was two mice. They must have been both nibbling at the cheese at once when it went off and caught the two of them. But between one thing or another, after the winter was over, we began thinking of looking for somewhere else. So Mum started to look around for somewhere else. Of course, it was especially with being new to the place, with no chance of renting a house. It was as bad in Beeston as it was anywhere else. There were very few houses for rent, and it simply meant going in rooms again. And eventually, your mum found a place where we could have one big room, downstairs and quite a big room upstairs. In fact, it was at the bottom of Park Street, facing the Checkers Inn in Chilwell. And it was they were a couple without any children, Mr. and Mrs. Roberts. They were younger than we were. He was a conductor on Barton's buses. But although in some respects, it was a lot better for convenience, because she had Mum had the use of the kitchen with Mrs. Roberts for doing any cooking on, and it was really more roomy altogether. We had a lot more room in this place. The only drawback was that Mr. Roberts didn't like Joan and Eileen going in the garden, and whenever they were in the garden, they never did any harm. They just walked round the garden, and because they had nowhere else to go. And if they were in the garden, he'd tell them to go in. So, although it was convenient in one sense, we didn't like this, and we very soon started to look around again. Well, luckily, I saw another advert in the Post. I didn't take it regular. I only used to take the Post if I wanted to look for anything in the to lets or that sort of thing. I was just looking in case something turned up, that we might be able to get a rented house. But I saw this advert for. But it was a rented, furnished house, and I went and inquired about it, and although the rent was a lot higher than we'd had to pay for rooms, in fact, it was quite a lot in those days. It was 13 shillings a week, which was quite a lot. But Mum and I talked it over, and we decided that it was worthwhile paying that extra to get into our own house, even though it was furnished. And so we moved to Frith Cottage at the top of Meadow Lane, Chilwell. It was owned by a man named what was his name? Anyway, I'll think of it a bit later on. But he was a schoolmaster, and he was a bachelor, and the school that he was the master in was in some other part of the country, so that he didn't use this cottage that he owned much, although all his furniture was in it and all the things that belonged to him. It had a cellar underneath, by the way. Mr. Oldham, his name was. I knew it had come to me in a bit. But we got to this furnished cottage, and my word, if your mum was alive today, in fact, she'd probably have told you already that it was the happiest time of our lives, of our married life up to then, when we got in this cottage, of a rented cottage where there was just us, nobody else. There was only one drawback, but it didn't spoil her pleasure at being in the cottage. And that was that being a furnished cottage, of course, it cut down a bit of this room, because we'd got our own furniture, not a lot, but quite a bit nevertheless. So there was 3 bedrooms in this cottage, and we only really needed 2. So what we did was we put all our furniture in the spare bedroom, never used it, and as we were paying for a furnished cottage, of course we were quite were quite right in using all the furniture and the cutlery, everything that was in the cottage we were allowed to use because we were paying for it. During the time that we were the Roberts people, my sister Alice and a young man, Tom Williams, came and spent a weekend with us. The position of Frith Cottage in those days was just lovely. I mean, it was right at the top of Meadow Lane, Chilwell, as I've mentioned before. About 50 yards down the lane was a school, and just opposite was about 3 cottages, and then there was no more buildings. You could walk right down Meadow Lane until you came to the railway crossing. When you got to the railway crossing, there was just a swing gate that you went through, and you were in a meadow at the other side of the railway, which led down to the river. Well, they hadn't started on these digging these pits at that time, so it was all grass with cattle grazing on it. And you walked across this meadow, and no trees. It was just as I said, it was just like one big meadow, and you went across the middle of it, and you came down to the riverside, and you sit down on the bank and rest. And we used to take, of course, we used to all 4 go down together, especially at weekends, Saturdays and Sundays. And then from Frith Cottage, on the opposite side of the road was the entrance to Cater Lane. That too, there was no buildings up in those days. You could walk right up Cater Lane. There was trees either side and a bit of a wood at the top, just before, about halfway between the high road and the golf links. Then when you kept up Cater Lane until you came to the Beeston golf links, and then there was a footpath across the golf links that you were allowed to use. And that brought you out in Bramcote. And there was all these nice walks, nice and quiet and pleasant, without any traffic, and it was so enjoyable. And on a Saturday night, I used to go down Meadow Lane and then branch off just before you came to the railway, branch off along the lane to Attenborough Village. And I used to go through Attenborough Village and on to Long Eaton Market. At Long Eaton Market, of course, there's no fridges in those days, you must remember, so that the butchers in the market, who some of them were Nottingham butchers, and they used to have a stall in Long Eaton Market. And of course they didn't want to take any meat back at night on a Saturday night, because they didn't know where to keep it fresh. So they always tried to sell up before the market closed on a Saturday night. And that meant that over the last hour or two, they used to sell the meat by auction. And you'd get a nice roast at about half the price that you would have to pay, say, if you went and bought it from a Beeston butcher. And I'd found this out, and every Saturday night I used to make this trip. I used to walk all the way. I liked the walk. It was nice and quiet, and there was no buildings in the lanes, just like going through the countryside. No gravel pits or anything like that. And when I got to, it'd say, "Oh, give me so much for this," you know, the usual auction idea, but it usually ended that I could get a nice roast of English meat for 1 and 6pence. And as I say, it would have cost me about double if I'd have gone to a Beeston butcher and bought it like that. And we used to get this lovely roast every weekend. And it was worth going for. And apart from that, I liked the walk. And there was a Marks and Spencer's place in Long Eaton. Now, in those days, Marks and Spencer's, that's who they were, just Marks and Spencer's, two men who owned the whole thing. It wasn't the Marks and Spencer's like you see today. It was more on the old Woolworths style, but with Woolworths, there was nothing over 6pence. In Marks and Spencer's, there was nothing only 3pence. And I always called in there on a Saturday night after I'd got my meat, and for a penny each, I could get something for Joan and Eileen. And they were usually in bed by the time I got back, because they went to bed about 8 o'clock, and I didn't get back till after 9. But I always went up to the bedroom and took them whatever I'd brought them, and they looked forward to it. They were waiting for me. But then there was a Mrs. Rodley who lived near too, and your mum made a friend of her. She was very nice. They were very nice people, the Rodleys were. And between one thing or another, I'll probably tell you more about different things later on, but we were really happy there, and Mum herself always said that it was the happiest time of her life when we were in Frith Cottage. I'm coming to the end of this tape, so later I'll tell you of our first Christmas at Frith Cottage. I ought to have started to read this about 10 years ago, because it's very difficult to read just from notes and keep up a nice fluent style, especially when you're getting in near to your 89th birthday. The only way to have done would have been to have written it out word for word and then just read it.